Is it possible that the deepest root of human history, the fundamental narrative we tell ourselves about civilization's inception, is not merely incomplete, but fundamentally misplaced? We speak often of the dawn of recorded time, pointing inevitably toward the sun-baked plains of Mesopotamia, where the first cities rose like sudden, magnificent monuments to human ingenuity. We recognize Sumer as the fertile cradle, the birthplace of writing, law, and complex theological structure. And central to this recognition stands the pervasive, enigmatic presence of the Anunnaki, those figures described in the cuneiform tablets as the heavenly ones who came down to earth. Their story, detailed across thousands of recovered clay fragments, forms the bedrock of modern alternative archaeology and ancient astronaut theory. But if we allow ourselves a moment of unsettling silence, if we press the question beyond the established arrival date, an eerier thought begins to surface. What existed in the silence before their descent? The Sumerian texts, those meticulous, obsessive records of rulership, cosmology, and construction, offer more than just an account of the Anunnaki's influence. They carry vestiges of a deeper, far more ancient memory, a palimpsest of realities that were deliberately, or perhaps tragically, overwritten. We must approach these clay archives not as static museum pieces, but as living testimony, sometimes contradictory, often fragmented, yet fiercely protective of a truth that predates even the very concept of historical time as we understand it. The established narrative often begins with the arrival, the journey from Nibiru, the need for gold, the subsequent creation or engineering of Homo sapiens as a slave species. This is a grand and compelling narrative, certainly, one that reshaped human understanding of the divine. But to focus solely on the arrival is to ignore the foundation upon which they landed. When the Anunnaki arrived, did they find a pristine, untouched world, ready for colonization and initial organization? Or did they encounter something far more complex, perhaps something already established, organized, and quietly decaying? The evidence suggesting the latter is subtle, woven into the fabric of the longest and most cryptic texts, often dismissed as mere mythological filler or poetic exaggeration. Yet if we read closely, we find accounts of construction projects undertaken before the Anunnaki needed labor, descriptions of terrestrial structures that served functions unrelated to gold mining, and chilling references to systems of governance that were already in place, systems that needed to be either dismantled or co-opted upon the newcomer's arrival. The Sumerian chroniclers, meticulous as they were, had a peculiar habit of listing their rulers. The Sumerian king list is perhaps the most intellectually jarring document ever recovered, an archive that abruptly transitions from historical, recognizable kings ruling for reasonable lengths of time to the antediluvian kings, those who ruled before the flood. The sheer chronology associated with these earliest rulers is staggering, measured not in decades or centuries, but in czars, periods ranging from 28,000 to 43,000 years for a single king. If we discard the idea that these numbers are purely symbolic, a necessary concession if we take the remaining text seriously, we are left confronting an impossible, deeply unsettling sequence of organized power that vastly predates the arrival date usually attributed to the major Anunnaki figures, like Enki and Enlil. These hyper-long reigns suggest something beyond human or even semi-divine administration. They imply a prior epoch, a framework of governance designed for a much longer biological or cosmological cycle, perhaps even suggesting a stewardship of the Earth by beings fundamentally different from both humanity and the incoming Anunnaki. This realization forces a complete recalibration of the historical paradigm. The Anunnaki did not arrive on a blank slate. They entered an inherited landscape, a realm that was already managed. And what did this prior management look like? The tablets speak of great cities, but also of great engines, structures whose purpose remains cryptic, often translated vaguely as cult centers or temples, yet whose descriptions hint at monumental infrastructural purposes. Consider the enduring, if often overlooked, mythic geography of the Sumerians. Before Eridu, before Ul, before the establishment of the great administrative centers of the Anunnaki, there were references to a foundational locale, often called Dilmun, a pure, clean place, a garden where death did not exist. While usually treated as a mythological paradise, its description sometimes aligns chillingly with the necessary prerequisites for a highly advanced technological outpost, a place of perfect sanitation and control. This Dilmun, mentioned in the context of primordial creation, seems to represent not merely a place of leisure for the gods, but perhaps the remnants of the operational base of the previous stewards, an infrastructure that the newcomers either respected or needed to conquer. This silent history, the story beneath the story of the Anunnaki, is what we must now investigate with meticulous care. It requires a willingness to sit in the tension of uncertainty, to accept that the most foundational truths are the hardest to excavate. The clay holds the whispers of a forgotten era, an era not dominated by the politics of gold and manufactured humanity, but perhaps by beings concerned with cosmic alignments, geological stability, or observation. If this history makes you pause, if you feel the weight of this forgotten knowledge, perhaps you should acknowledge that connection by pausing for a moment, reflecting on the depth of the history we are about to uncover, and letting the digital current know that you are here, observing this foundational layer of reality. A simple click on the like button helps ensure this vital investigation remains visible, and subscribing ensures you receive every fragment of this 9-part series as we piece together this colossal puzzle. Take a moment now and join this quiet journey into the deep past, because what comes next is the specific evidence, the textual confirmation of the world that had to be reckoned with. We are hunting for the signature of a lost civilization, not one lost to human forgetfulness, but one perhaps actively obscured by those who followed. Think of the concept of the me in Sumerian mythology, the divine decrees or fundamental operating instructions that governed the universe and civilized life. These me were not invented by the Anunnaki. They were retrieved, often by cunning or force, from pre-existing sites and beings. Enki, the god of wisdom, often the central figure in the Anunnaki story, is shown acquiring these foundational powers, suggesting a transfer of authority, a seizure of the operating code for the planet. But who wrote the original code? Who established the cosmic parameters that the Anunnaki found necessary to inherit and utilize? The Sumerian accounts subtly detail a world not just populated, but organized under a high degree of order long before the great conflicts between Enlil and Enki, or the eventual creation of Adamu. The tablets suggest an organizational principle, a chthonic architecture rooted deeply in the earth, designed by what could only be described as the primordial architects. These were beings who did not necessarily descend from the heavens in spacecraft, but perhaps rose from the depths or were native guardians of the terrestrial sphere, tied to the very cycles of the planet's magnetic field and geological movements. Their legacy is not found in massive gold processing plants, but in the perplexing precision of certain megalithic sites globally, sites that appear to predate the established Anunnaki timelines and utilize astronomical or geological knowledge that seems entirely unrelated to the newcomers' immediate agendas. The key to unlocking this pre-Anunnaki history lies in recognizing the cyclical nature of time as understood by the ancients. They did not subscribe to a linear view. They foresaw great cycles, periods of destruction, inundation, and cosmic reset. The flood narrative, so central to Sumerian memory, was not the first great catastrophe, but the most recent in a series. This explains why the evidence of the preceding epoch is so fragmented. It was not just forgotten, it was erased by environmental cataclysms that wiped the slate clean, leaving only the most resilient records, those baked into clay or encoded into ritual memory. When the Anunnaki arrived, they were setting up shop on a graveyard, building upon the ruins and the inherited failing infrastructure of the beings who had been overwhelmed by the previous cycle's end. This means the task of the newcomers was twofold. Colonization, yes, but also a sophisticated effort in historical obfuscation, ensuring that the new rule was perceived as the absolute beginning. This systematic erasure, the imposition of a new origin story, is the most difficult aspect to penetrate. We are looking for ghosts in the historical machine, for anomalies in the language that survived the Great Flood and the establishment of the new pantheon. To speak of what existed before the Anunnaki is to challenge the very foundation of their authority, which rested entirely on the claim of bringing order where there was chaos and life where there was nothing. But the ancient texts refuse to support this clean break. Instead, they continually reference a time of perfect knowledge, a time when communication with the very fabric of existence was unmediated, prior to the necessary filters and structures imposed by the incoming celestial rulers. Our journey must now descend into the specific texts that survived this historical filtering process. We must analyze those creation narratives, particularly those centered around the city of Eridu, that speak of the establishment of systems before the arrival protocols of Enki and Enlil were implemented. These foundational narratives carry the specific, unsettling names of the structures, the knowledge, and perhaps even the beings who held stewardship of the earth when the stars were watched by others, long before the Anunnaki saw this planet as a crucial outpost for their own survival. The first texts we must examine are not the familiar epics detailing the struggles between the gods, but the deeper, more reserved tablets detailing the initial organization of the planet, the whispered creation stories of Eridu that directly challenge the conventional timeline, revealing an established world that the Anunnaki merely inherited, adapted, and then quietly buried. This world, this foundation, awaits us in the coming segment, demanding we confront the specific names and roles of those who came before the celestial observers. We must now turn our attention to the clay itself and the astonishing Eridu Genesis fragments. What if the most profound truths were not etched into the clay tablets, but defined by the vast, echoing space around the inscriptions? We have painstakingly catalogued the genealogies of the Anunnaki, traced the meticulous construction of Eridu, and followed the dramatic conflicts between Enki and Enlil. Yet there is an uncomfortable silence that permeates the earliest cuneiform records. It is the silence surrounding the true fundamental origin of being itself, long before the golden-crowned beings descended from the heavens. The official narrative, the one curated and disseminated across the great cities of Sumer and Akkad, begins with the chaos of Tiamat and the subsequent ordering of the cosmos by Marduk or Enlil, the conquerors. But a deeper dive into the most archaic fragments suggests this ordering was not a creation from absolute nothingness, but rather a reformation of systems, a deliberate overwrite of a previous operating code. To truly understand what existed before the Anunnaki, we must look past the established myths of divine arrival and focus on the concept of deep time, as understood, or perhaps feared, by the Sumerians themselves. Their king lists, while seemingly enumerating mere mortal reigns, stretch back into eras of impossibly long durations, citing rulers who governed for tens of thousands of years. These are not simply exaggerations. They represent an acknowledgement of cycles far grander than the human experience, suggesting an epoch when the mechanics of existence operated under a different physical or energetic paradigm. Were these rulers actually physical kings, Or were they perhaps metaphors for celestial alignments, cosmic constants, or even the remnants of an observational civilization that existed in the geological time frame, not the historical? The recognition of these deep cycles creates a profound disquiet. It implies that the structure we perceive as permanent, the sky, the earth, the laws of physics that govern our daily lives, is merely the temporary arrangement imposed by the current celestial regime, the one ushered in by the Anunnaki themselves. This leads us to the unsettling possibility that the Anunnaki did not arrive on a barren, formless mud ball. They arrived on a world steeped in ruins, a planet that carried the heavy, tectonic memory of a previous non-human civilization. We begin to recognize the pattern not in the completed temples, but in the foundation stones, those massive, geometrically perfect blocks buried deep beneath the visible ziggurats. These were structures whose precision and scale far surpassed the known technology of early dynastic Sumer, suggesting the Anunnaki utilized an existing infrastructure, adapting and repurposing it, rather than building entirely from scratch. If we truly want to unearth the hidden story, we must act as archaeologists of consciousness, sifting through the layers of mythology to find the architectural blueprints of the previous order. This pursuit requires immense focus, drawing parallels between ancient linguistic fragments and modern cosmology. If these revelations intrigue you, if the scale of this historical mystery resonates deep within your understanding of reality, then please consider taking a moment to engage with this material. Your comments below, detailing your own interpretations of these ancient cycles, are invaluable to this shared investigation, and your subscription ensures we can continue to uncover these difficult truths together. The initial strangeness associated with the king list's impossibly long reigns soon gives way to a deeper philosophical recognition. The necessity of the Anunnaki to impose order suggests the previous state was chaotic, but perhaps not in the sense of random destruction, but rather chaotic relative to the biological needs of their newly engineered human workforce. Imagine a world governed by pure energy dynamics, an existence perhaps entirely vibrational or observational, lacking the dense physicality required for the construction of gold mines or the cultivation of grain. This primordial blueprint, referenced vaguely as the dwelling place of beings like Apsu and Tiamat, speaks of an era before duality, before the separation of sky and earth, fresh water and salt water. It was a singular, unified, potentially boundless state. The Anunnaki's great triumph, often celebrated as Marduk's victory over Tiamat in the Enuma Elish, then becomes less of a heroic mythological battle and more of a cosmic engineering project. They shattered the previous unity, dividing the waters and establishing the celestial orbit of Nibiru, thereby physically and spiritually preventing the recoalescence of the older, unified reality. This act, however, leaves a lingering question. Did they successfully eradicate the previous order or merely place it in deep storage? The subsequent unease stems from the realization that Sumerian cosmology is replete with warnings about cycles and returns, the inevitability of the wheel turning. If the Anunnaki merely suppressed the preceding consciousness, the architectural precision of their civilization might serve not just as monuments to their power, but as seals, meticulously placed energetic locks designed to prevent the emergence of the forgotten entities. We start finding these faint signals in the gaps of the narrative. What were the things that the Anunnaki found already existing upon their arrival? Beyond the primitive hominids they would later manipulate, there are oblique references to the Old Ones or the pre-dynastic lords who required displacement, not conquest. These weren't divine rivals like the Igigi. These references point toward an older, perhaps simpler, but infinitely enduring form of life or consciousness that operated purely by geometric principles, the fundamental mathematics of the planet itself. The Anunnaki, despite their advanced technology, were constrained by the physical requirements of their own DNA and life support systems. The pre-dynastic entities, conversely, seem to have been entirely unbound by biological form, perhaps existing as sentient algorithms woven into the fabric of Earth's geomagnetic field. If this is true, the arrival of the Anunnaki was not merely colonization, it was a necessary transformation, driven by the desire to impose a recognizable, hierarchical physical structure onto an otherwise amorphous spiritual reality. This realization brings profound intellectual uneasiness. It casts the history of human creation not as an ascent from ignorance, but as a severe and orchestrated memory purge. The Sumerian gods had to rewrite history, establishing themselves as the eternal progenitors, ensuring that the human consciousness they were breeding would never remember the possibility of existence outside of the Anunnaki's physical dominion. Every subsequent myth, from the Babylonian to the Hebrew, carries this signature of erasure, this careful re-editing of the beginning. But the Sumerian texts, despite their censoring, are not perfectly sanitized. They contain residual data, a persistent echo. This residual data hints at the return mechanism. If consciousness operates cyclically, tied to astronomical precessions and the return of Nibiru, then the very mechanism that facilitated the Anunnaki's repeated arrivals also dictates the potential resurgence of those they supplanted. The previous order, therefore, isn't truly dead. It is merely awaiting a specific celestial synchronization, a signal written in the stars that bypasses the Anunnaki's terrestrial seals. The subtle implication is that the Anunnaki were not only the creators of our civilization, but also the tireless custodians of this suppression, constantly vigilant against the signs of the previous cycle attempting to assert itself. We must consider the architects of this obsolescence. Were the before entities deliberately removed because they were a threat, or because they were simply irrelevant to the material goals of the Anunnaki? Perhaps they were too vast, too slow, operating on timescales incomprehensible to a newly physical, resource-hungry civilization. The gradual revelation unfolds. The true secret hidden within the Sumerian clay is not the drama of the gods, but the profound realization that our current reality, our three-dimensional existence defined by time and space, is a construct built upon the ruins of something infinitely larger and more abstract. We are living within the walls of a refurbished structure, and the blueprints of the original foundation are beginning to show through the cracks. This perspective transforms the very concept of heritage. We are not just the inheritors of the Anunnaki's DNA. We are subconsciously carrying the resonant frequency of the previous forgotten existence, the true old ones whose presence the gods worked so hard to silence. This brings us to the final, unsettling layer. The silence in the Sumerian tablets concerning the true prehistory mirrors, the global silence surrounding the world's inexplicable megalithic structures, Göbekli Tepe, Tiwanaku, Baalbek. Were these massive stones, predating known history and often exhibiting celestial precision, the remnants of the Anunnaki's initial survey? Or were they the final, impenetrable structures left behind by the entities that preceded them, monuments not to human labor, but to a physics based on vibration and thought? The Sumerians wrote about their present, but the physical evidence on the ground speaks of a deep past that simply refuses to be overwritten, a tangible sign of what existed before. Their chronicled history began. If you have stayed with this journey of inquiry, delving into the deep silence between the lines of the cuneiform, it is because you recognize the profound importance of what we are uncovering. This is not mere historical speculation. It is an investigation into the foundational layers of reality itself. If the possibility of a previous forgotten order, an existence outside the purview of the Anunnaki, resonates with you, please ensure you are subscribed to the channel. Liking this video helps these crucial discussions reach others who share this deep curiosity. And today, I ask you to comment below with this specific phrase: "The silence is the answer." By doing so, you become a recognized part of this continued quest for the hidden truth. We are far from finished. The next part of our investigation will take us directly into the linguistic anomalies within the oldest tablets, searching for the literal words the Anunnaki used to describe the remnants they inherited. Join us as we look past the imposed order to find the signal of what truly existed before. Did the very first step of existence, as we are taught to understand it through the established narratives of Sumer and Akkad, truly begin with the descent of the Anunnaki? This question requires a profound silence, a meditative pause, as we sift through the echoes preserved in the clay tablets, echoes that suggest not a sudden genesis, but a complex, almost agonizing continuation. We have anchored our focus on the arrival, the great fanfare of those who came from the sky to engineer humanity, but in doing so, we risk missing the spectral evidence embedded in the texts themselves, the faint yet persistent signature of what was already there, inhabiting the spaces and structures of the earth before the celestial travelers ever set foot upon the watery surface. The Sumerian accounts are not history books beginning at page 1. They appear to be instruction manuals for salvaging a forgotten library. They record the installation of a new regime, yes, but simultaneously detail the careful mapping of existing infrastructure, cosmic, spiritual, and perhaps even terrestrial infrastructure they neither designed nor fully comprehended. We must scrutinize the linguistic choices made by the scribes. When describing the primeval state, they do not merely depict an empty void, a nothingness waiting for creation. Instead, the language speaks of a primordial order that was disrupted, a great structuring force, Tiamat and Apsu, which were not chaos in the sense of random emptiness, but rather a system that needed to be recalibrated or, more violently, overthrown. If the Anunnaki came to Earth to mine for gold and establish their dominion, why was the immediate focus on dismantling and reassembling the very fabric of existence, engaging in what sound like cosmic battles against established, powerful entities? This suggests a preceding structure of authority, a governance that predated the arrival of the new masters. This dissonance in the narrative arc is what creates that profound sense of estrangement. We recognize the names of the gods, but we feel instinctively that we are missing the chapter detailing their predecessors. The tablets speak of the Mi'i, the divine decrees or blueprints that governed everything from priesthood and kingship to technology and ethical practice. Why would a newly arrived superior civilization need to rely so heavily on transferring these Mi's from the older entities to the newer ones? In the story of Inanna and Enki, the acquisition of these Mes is presented as a complex negotiation, a form of intellectual property transfer rather than a unilateral creation by the incoming deity. This is the crucial moment of recognition. If the Mes were the fundamental source code for civilization, and they were possessed by entities preceding or coexisting with the Anunnaki, it strongly implies that the core operating system of this planet, its spiritual and material laws, was not written by the newcomers. The Anunnaki, therefore, were less like architects of a new world, and more like highly sophisticated restorers, adapting and utilizing the pre-existing blueprints left behind by those who first established the principles of order. This realization brings an element of creeping unease. What happens to the memory of the original architects when the restorers take all the credit? The texts themselves, often revered as the starting point, may in fact be the record of a great, universal act of selective forgetting. Delving deeper into the pantheon, we find the elder gods, or the first-generation gods, entities often relegated to the background of the Anunnaki dramas. These figures, though sometimes vague in detail, consistently occupy a higher rung of antiquity, residing in the realms that existed when the distinction between the cosmos and Earth was far less defined. Their actions are not tied to the specifics of human civilization, the building of cities or irrigation, but to the massive, overarching principles, the setting of the celestial orbits, the division of the fresh and salt waters, the establishment of the cosmic clock. These acts sound like the initial stages of planetary terraforming, long before the need for a labor force, humanity, arose. We must entertain the possibility that the Anunnaki were themselves the second or third wave of cosmic visitors, inheriting the legacy and the burden of those who came before. The complexity of the Sumerian star charts and their knowledge of astronomical cycles, which appear to be unnervingly accurate for a civilization supposedly inventing writing and basic metallurgy simultaneously, cannot be easily dismissed. This knowledge seems too deep, too fully realized, to be a product of nascent observation. It suggests a legacy, a carefully preserved inheritance from a source that had the time, the resources, and the observational vantage point of millennia. The structure of time itself, as encoded in the Sumerian worldview, further supports this view of pre-existence. The concept of vast cyclical periods, the SARs, and the recurrent destruction and subsequent rebuilding of civilization implies an expectation of return. If history is cyclical, the story of the Anunnaki is merely the most recent observable chapter in a very long novel. What happened during the previous cycles? Why does the memory of the Great Flood, the deluge, loom so large, not just as a catastrophe, but as the precise punctuation mark dividing the history of humankind into before the flood and after the flood? That cataclysm, recounted across dozens of tablets, seems to have been the mechanism by which the older civilization, the civilization preceding the arrival of the specific Anunnaki we know, Enlil, Enki, Ishtar, was violently erased. The Anunnaki arrival, therefore, may have been precipitated by the flood, or perhaps planned precisely for the moment of global destabilization it caused. The missing signature of originality in the Anunnaki project becomes glaring when we look at the ruins. The massive ziggurats and the early cities, though undeniably impressive, follow highly precise, mathematically complex plans that often mirror astronomical alignments, suggesting a deep, ancient understanding of orbital mechanics and celestial geometry. Why would a group of sophisticated extraterrestrial beings, capable of interstellar travel, focus on Earth-based architecture that seems designed to interact with geological or cosmic energy grids? It suggests they were restoring pre-existing templates or utilizing sites whose energetic significance was already established by the previous dwellers. They didn't choose arbitrary locations. They settled in the traditional centers of power, places where the veil between the heavens and the earth was already thin. This is not creation. This is strategic occupation and adaptive reuse. The attempt to piece together this fragmented history is a humbling experience, requiring us to acknowledge the vast gaps in our current understanding. This exploration into the texts, seeking the ghosts of the truly first civilization, demands reflection and collaboration. If these deep resonances and strange symmetries embedded within the Sumerian narrative provoke your own intellectual curiosity and resonate with an instinct that something fundamental is missing from the accepted historical timeline, consider sharing your thoughts. What specific phrases or concepts in the ancient narratives known to you hint at this pre-Anunnaki presence? Engaging with this material collectively helps to illuminate the shadows cast by millennia of translation and interpretation. It is only through careful, shared scrutiny that we can hope to discern the true extent of the ancient heritage that the Anunnaki encountered upon their arrival. If this investigation compels you, consider recognizing the effort required to weave together these subtle threads of ancient knowledge by expressing your appreciation for this continued exploration and subscribing to ensure you do not miss the ongoing revelation of these long-forgotten secrets. Returning to the textual evidence, the records describe certain artifacts and structures not merely as old, but as possessing a forgotten brilliance, a kind of internal light or power that the subsequent generations struggled to replicate or even understand. Think of the descriptions of the Dilmun, often characterized as a land of purity, a paradisiacal home of the righteous gods who lived before the great mixing of heaven and earth. Dilmun is not a place invented by the Anunnaki. It is a repository of their predecessors, a geographic memory of a time when the world was ordered differently, perhaps under the direct guidance of those elder watchers whose legacy the Anunnaki inherited. These earlier entities weren't fighting for resources. They were concerned with the cosmic boundaries, the maintenance of a high-level reality that subsequent civilizations, preoccupied with basic survival and territorial disputes, could no longer maintain. The transition from the primordial era to the Anunnaki era seems marked by a shift from abstract, high-concept physics, cosmology, to concrete, material engineering. The civilization before the Anunnaki arrival might have operated on a level of awareness, interaction, and technology so different from ours that we misclassify their legacy as merely myth or natural catastrophe. When the texts describe weapons that shook the foundations of the sky, are they referring to simple celestial events or the destructive power of a lost technology used in the Great War that ended the previous cycle? The Anunnaki arrived to find a broken world, yes, but one filled with the ghosts of superior yet self-destructed systems. They didn't start from scratch. They simply scavenged the most useful components of the collapsed infrastructure. The persistent mention of the watery depths and the connection of Enki, the master engineer, to the Abzu, the freshwater ocean beneath the earth, is significant. The Abzu, often associated with wisdom and deep knowledge, existed long before Enki claimed it. It was the domain of Apsu, the original consort of Tiamat. Enki's primary role was not to invent the wisdom found there, but to access and control it. He literally took possession of the pre-existing foundational structure of knowledge. This is perhaps the greatest textual revelation. The Anunnaki, the figures we have long understood as creators, were fundamentally inheritors and stewards of the deep cosmic library, a library written and utilized by a profoundly powerful civilization that existed before their time. The next stage of our investigation must focus relentlessly on those specific textual fragments that detail the transfer of power, seeking the names, the symbols, and the technologies that define the true originators. If you have followed this intricate path of deduction, understanding that the greatest mysteries often hide in plain sight, we urge you to ensure you are subscribed to this channel. This is not just content. This is an ongoing investigation into the most profound secrets of ancient history. We are peeling back the layers of intentional obscurity, and we cannot afford to lose the thread now. Please take a moment to hit the like button if this deep dive into the implied history of the Sumerian texts has resonated with you, and cement your participation in this discovery by commenting the phrase, "Before the Watchers." Join us immediately in the next part, which is appearing on your screen now, where we will examine the specific artifacts and locations that the Anunnaki themselves identified as belonging to the epoch that preceded their reign. The lingering question, that unsettling silence hidden just beneath the triumphant proclamations of Sumer, demands our full attention now. If the coming of the Anunnaki marked the genesis of recorded, recognizable human civilization, the sudden explosion of complex mathematics, astronomy, and sophisticated city-states, then what narrative existed in the vast, submerged epochs immediately preceding their arrival? We must move beyond the literal translations of the arrival narrative and begin to analyze the profound omissions within the oldest cuneiform records. It is within these deliberate gaps, these vast lacunas of time, spanning untold thousands of years, that we find the spectral echo of what came before. Imagine the universe as a complex archive, constantly being overwritten. The Sumerian tablets, for all their detail regarding the lineage of kings and the precise dimensions of temples, often feel like a meticulously crafted second edition of a far older and perhaps far more disturbing text. The creation myth speaks of order rising from chaos, of Tiamat being split and the earth or Ki being formed. But why does this creation narrative feel so fundamentally focused on reorganization rather than absolute genesis? The matter was already present. The struggle was already in motion. What if the so-called chaos that Marduk or Enlil tamed was not primal disorder, but the residue of a highly ordered but recently shattered previous system? This is the point where curiosity curdles into a deep strangeness, forcing us to recognize that the foundations upon which the Anunnaki built their magnificent structures might have been salvaged debris from a precursor empire. The oldest texts, those few fragments that hint at a time when the gods themselves were merely roaming the cosmos, suggest a profound disorientation, a period of interstellar drift and searching. This period of searching, prior to the systematic mining operations and the establishment of Eridu, is almost universally glossed over. It's as if the chroniclers felt compelled to erase any memory of struggle or failure that occurred before the establishment of the divine hierarchy. Yet the subtle linguistic clues persist. When the Anunnaki arrive, they do not invent technology, they implement and utilize it. They arrive with a knowledge of celestial mechanics and genetic manipulation that implies an inheritance, a syllabus passed down from a previous, perhaps defunct, cosmological school. This recognition that the Anunnaki may have been inheritors rather than originators shifts the entire paradigm of their authority. It suggests they were cleaning up someone else's mess, or more chillingly, executing someone else's long-term plan. This leads us directly to the unsettling concept of the me. In Sumerian thought, the me were the fundamental divine decrees, the cosmic templates governing everything from kingship and ritual to musical instruments and prostitution. They were the established patterns of civilization itself. The narrative implies the Anunnaki possessed and distributed the me, effectively coding the rules for humanity. But if we follow the thread backward, the question is inescapable. Did the Anunnaki create the me, or did they simply capture them? The sheer universality and complexity of the me, their seemingly perfect mapping onto natural and social laws, suggests a foundational code too elegant to have been spontaneously developed by a group of interstellar miners focused primarily on extracting resources. Instead, the me feel like a recovered operating system, perhaps debugged and modified by the Anunnaki to suit their immediate needs, but fundamentally originating from the intelligence that structured the universe before their arrival. This sense of borrowed divinity sparks a deep intellectual inquietude. We begin to see the Anunnaki not as unparalleled architects, but as sophisticated tenants, occupying a structure built by beings whose scale and ambition dwarfed their own. The transition must have been traumatic, marked by a cosmic catastrophe that caused the collapse of the precursor's rule. If that system collapsed, how complete was the subsequent erasure? We must consider that the memory of the precursors was not entirely lost, but deliberately subsumed into the mythology of the new rulers. This knowledge may have been preserved by the enigmatic figures known as the Apkallu, the 7 sages who purportedly brought wisdom and civilization to humanity before the Great Flood. These fish-like or amphibious entities, often depicted as emerging from the deep waters, seem to hold the fragmented keys to the former age. They are the transitional figures, the guardians of knowledge that preceded even the earliest dynasties of Uruk and Kish. Their very existence is a testament to an intelligent stream that flowed around the Anunnaki intervention, maintaining a silent vigil over the forgotten code. If you are following this intricate path, delving into the shadows of history that few dare to examine, then you already understand the gravity of these possibilities. We are not just debating ancient history. We are questioning the fundamental nature of authority and reality itself. This is a discovery we must make together, analyzing every nuance of the texts and connecting these subtle signals across the vast chasm of forgotten time. Pause for a moment and consider the weight of this implication, that every civilization, every structure of power, might simply be a recurring echo of a pattern established long ago. If this line of inquiry resonates with the deepest parts of your understanding, if you feel this narrative of cosmic replacement demands more scrutiny, then I invite you to join this collective act of historical reclamation. Take a moment to hit the like button and subscribe, ensuring you stay linked to this investigation as we uncover these layers, one by one. And most importantly, share your thoughts in the comments below. What do you believe the Sumerian texts were deliberately instructed to forget? The deeper we read into the Sumerian cyclical view of time, the more the spectre of the precursors takes shape. The Anunnaki era, described in the king lists, is often brutally truncated by floods, plagues, and divine interventions. Yet these disruptive events are not random. They follow patterns. They are perhaps cosmic resets, system maintenance operations designed to prevent any single civilization from achieving the longevity and complexity of the one that preceded them. The ancient fear of the return is not merely the fear of the Anunnaki coming back from Nibiru. It is the far greater, far more existential dread that the original architects might choose to reclaim their structure. This fear is subtly woven into the mythology of many cultures that interacted with Sumer, the cycles of destruction in Mayan cosmology, the great epochs of the Hindu yugas, even the recurring solar deities of Egypt. All speak of ages of incredible light, followed by deliberate darkness, suggesting a universal framework for scheduled historical obliteration. We are hunting for a signal, not a radio wave, but a structural signature left behind in the Earth's geological and spiritual memory. If the precursors were highly advanced, their presence would not be defined by mere ruins, but by residual effects on the planet itself. We must look at the geological anomalies, the abrupt shifts in atmospheric composition noted in deep core samples that correlate suspiciously well with the mythological destruction events described in the tablets. These shifts suggest not natural catastrophes, but possibly the misuse or failure of colossal, world-altering technology employed by the precursors, forcing the Anunnaki to inherit a damaged globe, a fixer-upper that required extensive terraforming, often mythologized as creation. The legacy of the precursors, therefore, is not a forgotten city beneath the sands, but the subtle, persistent wrongness inherent in the early Sumerian framework. Why the need for such relentless labor? Why the immediate requirement for gold, seemingly essential not just for the Anunnaki's atmospheric needs, but perhaps for stabilizing the residual energy systems of the prior world? We must consider that the genetic modification of humanity was not purely about creating slaves, but about instilling a specific, limited consciousness, a restricted bandwidth, to ensure humanity could never access the sophisticated knowledge that led to the precursors. Downfall. Our inherent limitations, our frustratingly short lifespans, and our cyclical tendency towards self-destruction might all be carefully calibrated safeguards inherited from the precursors, but diligently maintained by the Anunnaki. It is the perfect act of cosmological control, ensuring that the current inhabitants never rise high enough to see over the wall of history and recognize the truly colossal beings that once held sway. We stand now at the precipice of recognizing this terrifying inheritance. The Sumerian tablets are not just records of the Anunnaki. They are the censored memoirs of a planet perpetually haunted by its initial masters. The memory, though suppressed, is trying to bleed through, manifesting as deep cultural anxieties about hidden technologies, ancient global catastrophes, and the recurrent theme of powerful, observing entities who watch our progress with an agenda far removed from our own immediate well-being. This suggests that the precursors may not be entirely gone, but merely dormant, existing in a state of suspended animation or interdimensional remove, leaving behind their me as tripwires, ensuring that when the time is right, their system can be reactivated. If you have stayed with this relentless descent into the forgotten chapters of time, then you are ready for the next phase of this investigation. We are closing in on the fundamental nature of the intelligence that preceded the Anunnaki, and the implications are staggering, affecting not just history, but our potential future. Our current understanding of linear time is proving inadequate to contain the reality revealed in these fragmented clay records. The narrative demands we confront the possibility that we are not the protagonists of this story, but merely players in a recurring drama written in an epoch we have been trained to ignore. The truth is often found in the text that was deemed too dangerous to survive. To continue this shared journey into the deeper mysteries and secure your place as a dedicated investigator, I urge you to subscribe now and hit the notification bell. Your engagement fuels this research and ensures that these forgotten histories are brought to light. Please let us know your key insight from this entire discussion by commenting with the single phrase, "The Precursors Code." And do not miss the next installment appearing on your screen now, where we will examine the physical evidence of this prior civilization and delve into the horrifying true meaning of the Great Flood. The weight of history is heavy, but we carry it together. What happens to existence when it recedes so far into the past that even the inheritors, the Anunnaki themselves, referred to it as the silence? We have spent so much time examining the records of what happened after the arrival, decoding the genealogy and the mythology, that we often overlook the chilling emptiness preserved in the oldest Sumerian texts, the void that preceded all recorded divine or human history. It is a terrifying proposition, one that challenges our very definition of archaeological time. If a civilization existed before the Great Flood, before the arrival of the supposed gods, and was so utterly erased that no tangible stone structure remains, how do we begin to conceptualize its nature? We are accustomed to searching for ruins, for megaliths, for the physical signature of a people. But what if the civilization that existed before the Anunnaki was not merely destroyed, but was fundamentally non-lithic, perhaps energetic, or operating on such a high frequency of existence that its remnants are intangible to our current comprehension of matter? The Sumerian king list and the early mythological accounts provide profound insights, not just through what they explicitly state, but through their deliberate omissions, their hesitations, and the respectful yet fearful distance they maintain when referencing the primordial eras. They speak of the Abzu, the primeval deep, the fresh waters, but the linguistic layers peel back to reveal something even older than these mythological constructs, a period of true, deep time when observation itself had not yet begun. Imagine the Anunnaki arriving, masters of space travel and genetic manipulation, only to find themselves standing upon a planet that had clearly been used, shaped, and then abandoned. Their civilization did not begin on a blank slate. They were not the first architects of this world's high culture. They were, instead, recyclers, archaeologists of a past so profound it terrified them. They found the remnants of a cosmic structure, a template, which they then adapted for their own needs, particularly concerning the cycles of the calendar and the sacred geometry of Eridu. The texts struggled to name what was before. often resorting to generic terms like the Forgotten Ones or the Observers. This avoidance of specific nomenclature is significant. If these preceding beings were merely primitive, the Anunnaki would have proudly documented their superiority. Instead, the narrative carries a subtle, almost reverent awe, suggesting that what was here previously was not less advanced, but perhaps differently advanced. It forces us to ask, what happens when the material record is wiped clean, not by slow decay, but by a sudden, cataclysmic reset, a cosmic event that transcends mere floods or ice ages? The answer may lie embedded in the cryptic warnings found on the earliest clay tablets, those that describe the mechanisms of cyclical time. These mechanisms suggest that existence operates in vast, recurring loops, and that every so often the cosmic order necessitates a kind of universal forgetting, a cleansing that prepares the stage for the next act. This is the crucial leap in understanding. The Sumerian texts do not just describe a prehistory, they describe a mechanism of profound, scheduled erasure. If this idea, that our existence is merely a phase within repeating grand cycles, resonates with the silent doubts that perhaps you, too, have carried about our place in the universe, then it is vital that you remain focused on this investigation. The Sumerian scholars themselves struggled with these dizzying implications, and we must approach these texts with the same meticulous caution. It is only by sharing these complex ideas and debating the precise interpretations of ancient linguistic nuances that we can truly begin to piece together this monumental puzzle. If this narrative is offering a new perspective on deep time, pause for a moment and consider showing your support by liking this video and ensuring you are subscribed. Your engagement helps us keep decoding these dense narratives, bringing this continuous, challenging investigation to light, connecting us all in the pursuit of what truly existed before. The depth of the void described in the primary sources is not merely chronological, it is philosophical. When the Anunnaki began their operations, they were immediately faced with logistical and technological challenges that required an existing framework. Consider the construction of the oldest ziggurats, the alignment with specific celestial points, the knowledge of metallurgy far exceeding contemporary human capability. Did they synthesize this knowledge ex nihilo? Or did they inherit the fundamental equations, perhaps even the residual energy grid of a prior era? The tablets strongly imply the latter. They speak of the me, the divine decrees, which were essentially packages of knowledge and civilization blueprints. But where did the me originate? Even when Inanna retrieves the me from Enki, the source of these codes is spoken of in hushed ancient terms, linking them to a primeval epoch that predates even the division of heaven and earth by Enlil. This primeval epoch is the core of our current inquiry, the state of the planet when the Sumerian texts reveal what existed before the Anunnaki came to Earth. What existed was perhaps a consciousness linked to the planetary body itself, an infrastructure designed not for conquest or mining, but for profound energetic resonance. The strange mention of the seven sages or Apkallu, pre-flood figures who brought knowledge but were not themselves Anunnaki, serves as a bridge. These sages are often depicted as quasi-aquatic or operating from a different plane of reality. They represent the final fading echoes of the predecessor civilization, figures who survived the cosmic reset and acted as residual information packets for the incoming architects. Their role was to hand over the keys to the kingdom, not the keys to the Anunnaki's new kingdom, but the keys to Earth's original design. The concept of the Apkallu leads us into a discussion of observation and signal. If a high civilization disappears, how does it leave a traceable signature without leaving physical stone structures? It leaves a signal. It leaves patterns, sacred geometry, or perhaps a change in the planet's magnetic resonance. The Sumerian obsession with astronomical precision far beyond what was required for agricultural cycles, suggests that they were calibrating their civilization to this residual signal, recognizing the specific points in the cosmic clock when the energy of the forgotten ones might return or become accessible. This speaks volumes about the level of technological sophistication that must have preceded them, a level where infrastructure was possibly built from sound, light, or focused mental intent, rather than crude matter. We must reflect on the profound silence the Anunnaki encountered when they first arrived. Not the silence of a barren world, but the silence of a massive machine that had been purposefully powered down. They saw the remnants of power sources, the scars of cataclysm, and perhaps most importantly, they observed the cosmic markers that dictated the timetable for the next inevitable event. This recognition created a fundamental psychological rift within the Anunnaki hierarchy. Some sought to learn from the primeval blueprint, to respect the cycles and the original intent. Others saw the emptiness as an opportunity, a vacuum to be filled by their own authority and ambition. This internal struggle between honoring the past and exploiting the present is subtly woven into the conflict between Enlil and Enki, a conflict that stretches back far beyond the construction of the first cities. To truly grasp the nature of the existence before the Anunnaki, we must confront the idea of scale, not just temporal scale, but cosmic scale. The disappearance was not local. It was linked to the vast orbital path of celestial bodies, perhaps the very mechanics of a dark companion star, or the deep cycle of the sun's passage through specific areas of the galaxy. The Sumerian texts, particularly those dealing with omens and stellar conjunctions, reveal a profound anxiety about the return of this specific alignment, the sign of the Great Erasure. This anxiety suggests that the before era wasn't simply a predecessor. It was a ghost, an ever-present threat of cyclical destruction waiting to reassert itself. The Sumerians were deeply preoccupied with the concept of inheritance and the fear of forgetting. If the Anunnaki inherited a framework, they also inherited a warning that no matter how mighty their own civilization became, it too was subject to the same cosmic dictates that erased the previous occupants. This realization explains the intense drive in early Sumer to document everything, to carve history into the hardest clay, hoping to defy the scheduled forgetfulness. They were not writing for themselves alone. They were leaving breadcrumbs for the next inheritors, anticipating a future reset where even their great names would be relegated to the realm of myth. The core question remains: if what existed before was so powerful, why did it disappear? Perhaps the civilization that preceded the Anunnaki reached a level of evolution where physical intervention became unnecessary. They might have transcended the need for physical structures and tools, existing purely as organized energy or refined consciousness. Their disappearance may not have been an end, but a transition, a voluntary stepping back from the material plane, leaving the infrastructure of the planet calibrated for a different purpose. And when the Anunnaki arrived, they mistook a state of transcendence for a state of abandonment, a mistake that would fundamentally define the material trajectory of human history. The very structure of the oldest texts, those that detail the initial organization of labor and the establishment of the Eden, feel less like creation narratives and more like activation sequences. The Anunnaki weren't creating a world. They were restarting a highly complex pre-existing system. We see this in the sudden appearance of high culture and specialized crafts without a recognizable preceding developmental stage. It's the intellectual equivalent of finding a sophisticated factory running at full capacity with no record of its initial blueprints or construction team. This inherited knowledge, passed down through cryptic lineage and guarded by the elite among the arriving gods, is the key to unlocking the true narrative of the ones before. We are now standing at the threshold of the most protected knowledge within the Sumerian corpus, the specific descriptions of this primeval entity or entities. The next stage of our investigation demands that we move beyond the metaphorical interpretations and delve into the technical language used to describe the pre-Anunnaki era. This shift in focus, from philosophy to lexicon, will begin to reveal not only who was here, but what their explicit relationship was to the physical makeup of Earth itself. This journey requires deep concentration and a willingness to accept that the history we thought we knew is merely a superficial overlay upon cycles of profound, forgotten knowledge. If you have stayed with us through this deep dive into the cyclical nature of time and the profound mystery of the Sumerian inheritance, then you are truly committed to uncovering the forgotten history of our planet. The narrative demands continuous attention, and the next part of this investigation will begin to name the nature of what existed before. If this exploration has broadened your perspective, please take a moment right now to subscribe to the channel and give this video a like. Your participation fuels this research and ensures that the deepest secrets of the Sumerian texts reach those who are ready to receive them. To mark your commitment to understanding the greater patterns of history, comment the word cycles. Do not miss the next transmission, which is appearing on your screen now, as we move closer to the undeniable revelation of what existed before the Anunnaki came to Earth. Where does history truly begin, and what defines the line between the verifiable past and the profound, inconvenient silence that precedes it? We have followed the faint trail encoded within the clay tablets of Sumer, the oldest voices echoing across the millennia, yet every step into the recognized history of the Anunnaki's arrival only deepens the enigma of what came before. The established narrative that the Anunnaki were the primordial architects of our current epoch is robustly detailed in the cuneiform, but the careful student must ask, is robustness the same as completeness? Or is the detail itself a masterful distraction? An overwhelmingly bright light pointed toward one specific corner of the stage, drawing attention away from the deeper shadows. We return now to the concept of the Great Forgetting, that vast expanse of time the texts refer to only in oblique. References: a state of planetary operation, a functioning global order that required no intervention, no instruction, because it was already intrinsically complete. If the Anunnaki came to Earth seeking gold, and if they chose the Mesopotamian valley and the sites of Eridu and Nippur for their initial operations, what factors dictated these choices? Were they selecting a vacant lot, or were they settling into the ruins of an older, grander structure they chose to recycle and rename? The texts sometimes speak of existing infrastructures, structures that predate even the arrival of Enki and Enlil, referred to often simply as the places or the foundations. These mentions are not treated with curiosity by the Anunnaki chroniclers. Rather, they are handled with the professional detachment of someone cataloguing existing equipment that has been rendered obsolete, but remains too massive or fundamental to simply dismantle. This implies a continuity, a heritage of physical presence that was inherited, not created. Think of the sheer, unsettling rapidity with which Sumerian civilization sprang forth, fully formed, possessing mathematics, astronomy, legal codes, and agricultural mastery seemingly out of thin air. Conventional archaeology struggles to find the necessary precursor steps, the hundreds or thousands of years of painful, gradual evolution usually required for such sophisticated leaps. The Sumerian explanation, of course, bypasses this intellectual struggle. The knowledge was given. But if the Anunnaki gave the knowledge, the question remains, from where did they derive the fundamental structural blueprints? We must move beyond the literal interpretation of the space journey and consider the deeper implications of cyclical history. The Sumerian belief system itself was obsessed with cycles, astronomical, agricultural, and cosmic, suggesting that the history they recorded was merely the current iteration in a much longer, recurring drama. This framework makes the idea of a pre-existing, non-Anunnaki civilization not just plausible, but mathematically necessary. A true cycle requires a beginning, a culmination, a collapse, and a rebirth. If the Anunnaki represent the rebirth, we must identify the collapse. The disquiet we feel when reading these fragmented accounts stems from the realization that the missing pieces of history might have been deliberately removed, or perhaps rendered into symbolic poetry so dense that their original meaning is almost impenetrable. This suggests that the civilization existing before the Anunnaki was not simply primitive, but possibly advanced in ways that were spiritually or technologically incompatible with the objectives of the newcomers. When we examine the linguistic residue within the tablets, specific names of locations that do not translate into known Sumerian or Akkadian, names whispered with reverence but devoid of function, we might be looking at the fossilized remnants of the First Age. Names, like ghosts, often linger long after the bodies of power they represented have faded. If this investigation into the subtle cues within the Sumerian record has sparked a realization, if you feel the weight of this forgotten history pressing upon the edges of the familiar timeline, then I invite you to join the growing community of researchers who scrutinize these deep-time puzzles. The only way to piece together this monumental palimpsest of prehistory is through collaborative focus and sustained attention. Take a moment, therefore, to signal your commitment to this journey. A simple like helps illuminate these often dark corners of research, and subscribing ensures you receive every subsequent part of this exhaustive inquiry. More importantly, leave a comment detailing what specific aspect of the pre-Anunnaki world, the silence, the structures, or the cycles, you find most profoundly unsettling. Your insights are not just comments. They are extensions of this collective act of intellectual recognition. The architecture of silence is perhaps the most eloquent testimony we possess. When the Anunnaki landed, they were not explorers charting an unknown continent. They were miners, establishing a base on a planet known for its specific resources. Yet, the texts hint that they had to modify or re-engineer the environment, not build it from scratch. This brings us face to face with the possibility that the first civilization was erased not by war, but by planetary catastrophe. A cataclysm so profound that even the highly advanced Anunnaki had to start fresh, carefully avoiding the most dangerous remnants of the previous age. The mythic deluge, the great flood central to nearly every ancient culture, might be the sanitized, poetic account of the event that brought the First Age to an end, leaving behind vast, desolate, and possibly irradiated structures that the Anunnaki simply chose to ignore or bury. This notion of selective engagement, that the Anunnaki only used what was safe or convenient, injects a layer of strategic caution into their actions, suggesting they were dealing with forces or technologies they respected enough to leave undisturbed. These previous architects, the inhabitants of the time before the deluge, likely operated under entirely different physical parameters, perhaps leveraging energy sources or material science that we cannot yet comprehend. Their residues are geological, not merely archaeological. They are encoded in the depths of the earth, sometimes manifesting as unusual mineral deposits or strange magnetic anomalies often noted but rarely explained by modern geophysics. The Anunnaki texts, particularly those dealing with the deep earth operations and the management of water systems, seem to contain a subtle fear, a fear of disturbing something fundamental, something ancient, something that had been placed into a state of intentional stasis. The failed blueprint of the First Age serves as a crucial warning. If a civilization could reach such heights of complexity and then vanish so completely, leaving only the faintest echo in the cuneiform, What does that say about the ultimate sustainability of highly advanced terrestrial life? The Anunnaki, themselves long-lived and technologically masterful, likely studied this collapse intensely. Their rigid, almost bureaucratic structure, their obsession with law, order, and resource management might have been a direct response to the perceived failures of their predecessors. They sought to establish control, to create predictability, where the First Age perhaps embraced transcendence and experimentation. We must consider the moment of the interloper's gaze, when the Anunnaki first surveyed Earth. What did they see? Not untouched wilderness, but a planet scarred by cosmic events and littered with the colossal wreckage of forgotten ingenuity. The key revelation here is that the Anunnaki may have acted as curators of decay rather than true founders. They inherited a museum of potential dangers and decided to utilize only the safest exhibits. Their records, therefore, are less about creation and more about management of existing conditions. This interpretation elevates the stakes of the texts, transforming them from mere foundation myths into operational manuals for planetary salvage. This is why the texts are ambiguous about the origins of the greatest structures. They were not created, they were simply found and reassigned. This continuous return to the deep time, the realization that the arrival of the Anunnaki aligns perfectly with vast known astronomical cycles, forces us to connect the dots between the cosmic and the terrestrial. If their planet, Nibiru, returns on a grand cycle, is it not logical that the state of Earth and the necessity of its governance is also cyclical? The need for previous structures, foundations, energy conduits, docking stations would not vanish simply because the Anunnaki departed. If they intended to return, they would need a functioning planet. Thus, the greatest legacy of the pre-Anunnaki civilization might be its silent infrastructure, the underlying dormant technologies that allowed for the subsequent rapid development of the post-Diluvian world. The genius of the Sumerian scribes, the cryptographers of clay, was not simply to record facts, but to preserve crucial information through layers of metaphor and ritual. They buried the profound truths of the First Age within liturgical texts and astrological charts, making them safe from the immediate scrutiny of those who might wish to erase them entirely. By elevating the history of the Anunnaki to the level of undeniable myth, they simultaneously demoted the history of the preceding era into impenetrable cosmology. It is in the obscure corners of the Epic of Gilgamesh, the strange geographical markers in the Enuma Elish, and the non-sequitur mentions in the king lists that we find the true coded language of the First Age, preserved like rare specimens in amber. This brings us to the crucial concept of the First Watchers. Were there entities preceding the Anunnaki who were not destroyed by the cataclysm, but merely retreated? Perhaps they were observers, or perhaps they were the original, subtle guardians of the planet, not necessarily physical, but energetic or spiritual. The Sumerian texts contain strange references to beings of light and beings of water who predated the metallic, often aggressive Anunnaki. These are the shadowy figures who might have maintained the critical stasis of the planet until the arrival of the next great cycle. This presence, subtle and non-interfering, explains why the Earth was not a complete wasteland when the Anunnaki arrived. Someone or something had stabilized the remnants. The ensuing relationship between these remnants and the incoming Anunnaki might have been governed by an unwritten treaty, a fragile accord established in the ruins of the global disaster. The Anunnaki could utilize the planet and its resources, but they must respect the ancient silence, the forbidden zones, and the inherent natural structures established by the First Age. This implied contract might explain why the Anunnaki never achieved true global domination in the ways that modern empires are conceived. They were limited by the unspoken laws of the preceding civilization. This tension between the pragmatic needs of the Anunnaki and the profound, silent legacy of the First Age is the key dynamic we must continue to unravel. The knowledge of what existed before was not merely interesting trivia, it was the ultimate strategic constraint on the operations of the newcomers. We stand now at the precipice of understanding not merely who the Anunnaki were, but what they feared. That fear, encoded in the meticulous detail and the conspicuous omissions of the ancient texts, points inexorably toward the sophistication and eventual demise of those who came before. The loom of the horizon suggests that the cycles continue, and if history repeats itself, then the signals left behind by the pre-Anunnaki civilization are not merely historical records, but vital warnings for our own current epoch. If you have stayed with us throughout this rigorous examination, recognizing the profound connections between ancient cycles, lost civilizations, and the selective recording of history, then you are a crucial part of this continuing investigation. The stakes are immense, for the secrets of what existed before, the Anunnaki, are the very keys to understanding our own future, our own inheritance, and our own inevitable encounter with the next great cosmological shift. Please ensure you are subscribed to the channel and take a moment to hit the like button, signifying your deep engagement with this hidden knowledge. For those who truly absorbed the weight of this sixth part, please leave a comment using the phrase, "I see the residue." And do not pause your journey now. The next vital piece of this complex narrative is waiting for you immediately on the screen. What happens when the timeline shifts, not by years, but by epochs? We have dedicated ourselves to meticulously tracing the imprints left by the Anunnaki, studying the deep resonance of their arrival, their influence, and their seemingly sudden establishment of civilization in Mesopotamia. But the true weight of the Sumerian texts lies not just in what they confirm about the arrival of these sky people, but in the persistent, almost desperate whispers about what was already standing, or perhaps what had recently fallen when the great ships descended. It is a persistent paradox, a historical echo that suggests the ground the Anunnaki stood upon was already sacred, already saturated with the residue of immense knowledge and power, a power so vast that even the newcomers, themselves titans among mortals, had to acknowledge it, assimilate it, or most chillingly, actively erase it. This process of historical triage, what gets kept and what must vanish, is precisely where the narrative becomes most strained and unsettling. We are not simply dealing with prehistorical cultures that lacked writing. We are encountering evidence of systems, architectures, and perhaps even philosophical structures that were already established, already mature, and already engaged in a deep-time relationship with the cosmos. These predecessors, often relegated to mythical footnotes or conflated confusingly with early demigods, seem to have understood the geometry of the solar system, the complex mechanics of cyclical catastrophe, and the inevitability of the Great Return, long before the Anunnaki's calendar system was put into place. It raises the essential, terrifying question: did the Anunnaki discover Earth, or did they merely reclaim territory that was temporarily abandoned or awaiting the culmination of a vast, predetermined cosmic cycle? If we accept the Sumerian texts as containing literal, albeit symbolic, truth, that the Anunnaki arrived to begin a specific project, mining gold, establishing governance, and creating the Lulu Amelu, we must simultaneously accept the implication that their actions were superimposed upon a pre-existing blueprint. Think of the Eridu Genesis, or the fragments detailing the construction of the earliest known temples. These structures, according to some interpretations, utilize building methods and mathematical ratios that seem to anticipate the arrival of Nibiru, aligning their foundations not with mundane geographic markers, but with celestial alignments that only become crucial during specific points of the great procession. This suggests an engineering feat guided not by the current need, but by the memory of a past threat, or the anticipation of a future necessity. It speaks to a level of foresight and technological ability that challenges the foundational premise that the Anunnaki were the first great civilizers. The truth, hidden in plain sight, appears to be that they were the inheritors of a legacy so profound that its sheer scale threatened to overshadow their own achievements. It is a critical distinction that changes everything we assume about the origins of humanity and our place in the cosmic hierarchy. The unsettling quietness of the era. Before, the Anunnaki is not the silence of absence, but the heavy quiet of a vast library that has been sealed and boarded up, its contents classified, perhaps forever. This concept of inheritance demands our fullest attention, and if this complex tapestry of forgotten history and cyclical recurrence resonates with a deeper truth within you, if you feel the weight of this obscured past pressing down, take a moment to internalize the seriousness of this investigation. We are not dealing with simple folklore. We are deciphering the deepest archives of human memory. It is in the collective consideration that the fullest picture begins to form, a picture demanding careful scrutiny and quiet reflection. If you are tracking these intricate connections with us, ensuring this foundational research reaches others who seek true understanding, acknowledge the effort and the journey by engaging with the content. We continue to press against the veil, driven by the knowledge that the greatest secrets are often hidden in the oldest dust. The ambiguity surrounding the construction of the original structures, those first places of worship and calculation, suggests that they served a dual purpose. They were monuments to the predecessors and functional tools for the newcomers. Imagine a complex astronomical observatory designed to track a planetary body whose arrival is measured in millennia. When the Anunnaki arrived, did they simply read the complex stellar coordinates pre-inscribed onto the architecture, using the infrastructure already in place to calibrate their own arrival schedule? The notion that the Anunnaki merely rebooted a pre-existing system, rather than creating one wholesale, introduces an element of strategic planning that transcends simple colonization. It implies that these earlier beings, whoever or whatever they were, had established certain cosmic markers, warning systems, or perhaps even navigational beacons that guided the Anunnaki back to Earth. The Sumerian paradox deepens. If the Anunnaki possessed superior technology, why utilize the ancient monuments? Perhaps because those ancient monuments were built to withstand cycles of catastrophe, engineered against the ravages of time and the inevitable periodic floods that erase human memory. This leads us directly to the great pattern of recurrence. The Sumerian accounts, even those penned centuries after the Anunnaki were established, speak in terms of vast cycles: the Great Year, the recurring floods, the periods of darkness and enlightenment. These cycles suggest a cosmological awareness far more ancient than the texts themselves. It is the language of astronomical observation that must span hundreds of thousands of years to be fully appreciated. Who were the original keepers of this cosmic clock? They are the silent observers mentioned fleetingly in the deepest, most fragmented tablets, beings who watched the erosion of the first cities, who retreated or vanished before the great deluge, leaving behind only the ghost of their calculations. Their silence is the most eloquent testimony to their power, for the fact that the Anunnaki chose not to widely publicize this preceding history speaks volumes. If history is written by the victors, the fact that a prior epoch is barely mentioned suggests that the victors were extremely careful about controlling the narrative, ensuring that the memory of the before did not undermine the authority of the present. The implication of these missing records is profound. We aren't simply looking for forgotten texts. We are looking for a systematic, almost ritualistic process of intentional amnesia. Think of the layers beneath the clay. Every major Sumerian city is built upon the ruins of several older settlements. But beneath those known layers, archaeologists occasionally encounter anomalies, structures of immense, smoothed megaliths that defy known dating methods, often appearing waterlogged or bearing signs of extreme heat and pressure. These are not merely primitive structures, they are pieces of engineering that suggest a highly sophisticated understanding of materials and physics, technology that seems to predate not only the Anunnaki, but also the established timeline for human civilization itself. What happened to the civilization that built those foundations? Why did they leave, and why did they leave behind only the toughest, most immutable components of their world? It is as if they understood that their existence would be erased by time or catastrophe and purposefully left behind markers designed to survive, awaiting a later interpreter, perhaps even the Anunnaki themselves. The hidden layer beneath the clay is not just physical, it is mythological. When we examine the linguistic roots and religious concepts that predate the established Anunnaki pantheon, the deep well of Tiamat, the primordial struggle that existed before Enki and Enlil took their positions, we glimpse a cosmogony that operated on entirely different principles. This older, chaotic yet structured worldview seems to reference a time when consciousness on Earth was fundamentally different, perhaps less individualized, or perhaps linked directly to planetary energies, now subdued or harnessed by the new rulers. The Sumerian scribes, in their attempt to codify the new religious order, often struggled with these remnants, trying to fit the vast, untamed forces of the before into the neat, hierarchical structure of the Anunnaki administration. This struggle reveals the deep rift between the two epochs, confirming that the change was not merely political or technological, but existential. We must now approach the calculation of the great year itself. The arrival of Nibiru, the purported homeworld of the Anunnaki, is based on a cycle of approximately 3,600 years. Yet the history of Earth, as dictated by precession and galactic alignment, operates on the scale of the 26,000-year cycle. Was the 3,600-year cycle merely a subset of a much larger, overarching temporal framework established by the predecessors? It seems plausible that the Anunnaki's arrival coincided not just with the return of their own planet, but with a critical inflection point in the larger cosmic calendar, a moment of planetary resonance or gravitational necessity that was known and prepared for by the civilization that came before. If the Anunnaki were merely exploiting a known window of opportunity, then their actions, while powerful, lose some of their divine originality and gain the flavor of opportunism. The timing wasn't accidental, it was anticipated. This perspective fuels the question of intentional amnesia. If the preceding civilization was so advanced, why did they allow themselves to vanish, or why did they not resist the arrival of the Anunnaki? This is where the narrative shifts from mere history to profound existential philosophy. Perhaps the predecessors understood that specific epochs require specific stewardship. They may have completed their work, achieved a level of mastery that made continued physical intervention unnecessary, choosing instead to retreat to a different plane of existence or to become the invisible observers, the true watchers whose knowledge remains etched into the geometry of the planet itself. The Anunnaki, with their focus on labor, resources, and linear time, represent a necessary, albeit heavy-handed, evolutionary step. The memory of the before had to be suppressed because its very existence represented a different path, a higher form of consciousness that the nascent human species, the Lulu Amalu, was not yet ready to grasp. The final descent into the source demands that we now consolidate these fragments. We are looking for the seed of the next cycle, the hidden code left behind by the predecessors that promises their return, or perhaps our own eventual rise to their level of mastery. These fragments are often found in the most obscure tablets, in the accounts of heroes who lived unnaturally long lives, or in the descriptions of devices that could manipulate gravity or thought. These are not just fantastical tales. They are conceptual handoffs, messages embedded within the mythos, waiting for a time when humanity, having progressed through the stewardship of the Anunnaki, might finally be ready to look back, not with fear, but with recognition at the true origin point of knowledge on Earth. This journey is far from over. If you have followed the intricate threads of evidence, navigating the subtle shifts in the Sumerian timeline and feeling the increasing weight of what lies beneath our accepted history, then you are a crucial part of this unfolding revelation. The next phase of our investigation will force us to confront the nature of the Watchers themselves, those beings who span the gap between the predecessors and the Anunnaki, holding the secrets of the transition. We are standing on the precipice of understanding, and the most compelling evidence always waits just beyond the perceived end of the narrative. If you have been with us through this deep dive, feeling the resonance of these buried truths, I urge you to subscribe now to ensure you do not miss the final, culminating parts of this disclosure. Hit the like button to amplify this vital search for knowledge, and as a signal to the cosmos that you recognize the gravity of this discovery, leave a comment below with the specific phrase, "the oldest blueprint." Join us next, as we finally pierce the shadows and reveal the true identity and fate of the ancient observers. What if the greatest mystery of our origins is not what arrived, but what was left behind? The long silence preceding the epical arrival of the Anunnaki, as transcribed in the oldest cuneiform records, is perhaps the most eloquent passage in all of human history, precisely because it describes a complex absence. We have been meticulously examining the textual residues, the subtle linguistic anomalies, the mythological parallels, and the geological implications of the narrative of Tiamat and the primordial organizational structures, all pointing toward a highly sophisticated precursor system. Yet to truly grasp the weight of this precursor, we must shift our focus from the physical ruins, which may be entirely erased by subsequent cosmic catastrophes and geological cycles, and instead look at the architecture of cosmic memory itself, as encoded in the very foundation of Sumerian thought. The texts, particularly those dealing with the genealogy of the gods before the delineation of the heavens and earth, do not merely recount a void, they recount a state of extreme density, a period where concepts and matter were not yet cleanly separated, a condition that suggests the decay or dissolution of an even older, hyper-organized system. It is less the primal chaos and more the debris of order. Think of it not as a blank slate, but as a heavily overwritten tablet where only the deepest initial inscription occasionally bleeds through the surface. This deep inscription, we have argued, represents the structure that preceded the Anunnaki, the structure they were ostensibly commissioned to repair or replace. But what does it imply about the nature of those initial architects? If the Anunnaki arrived possessing knowledge of orbital mechanics, advanced metallurgy, and sophisticated societal planning, as suggested by their immediate establishment of complex cities and specialized functions, this knowledge must have derived from an existing cosmic inheritance, or they were operating based on a clear, pre-established blueprint. The Sumerian narratives consistently present the Anunnaki not as starting from zero, but as implementing a design. They were the executive committee, not the original conceptualizers. And the conceptualizers, the ones who preceded their arrival and whose presence is marked only by the strange vacuum in the records, were the bearers of the true, uncorrupted signal. This signal, this energetic template of the civilization before, is what produces the deep sense of estrangement when we read these ancient texts. They are familiar enough to be recognizable. They speak of governance, hierarchy, and cosmic purpose, yet fundamentally alien in their scale and their underlying operational logic. We recognize the shadow of ourselves, but cast by a sun that rises in a different sector of the galaxy, or perhaps in a different cycle of time entirely. This recognition brings with it a profound intellectual disquiet. If a civilization of such immense complexity could vanish, leaving behind only a spectral echo, what guarantee do we have that our current iteration is not merely the penultimate layer of dust on the cosmic mantelpiece? This question, often felt unconsciously when one gazes too long into the history of lost civilizations, is what the Sumerian scribes were grappling with, attempting to memorialize a past so distant it had become mythological even to the arriving gods. This sense of profound temporal depth, this acknowledgement that time is cyclical and that great systems rise and fall not in millennia, but in vast epochs, is crucial. It urges us to consider the possibility that the Anunnaki event was not a unique origin point, but rather a periodic, pre-programmed corrective measure. They are the cosmic engineers dispatched when the previous iteration inevitably reaches its entropy limit. The texts provide a haunting suggestion that the failures of the before civilization were not merely external, like floods or planetary collisions, but internal, a failure of sustainability perhaps, or a deviation from the original pure signal. If this deep exploration of cosmic continuity and pre-Anunnaki architecture resonates with your understanding of history and the mysteries that bind us, take a moment to pause and reflect. The act of thoughtful engagement is critical to unlocking these layers of knowledge. If you feel compelled by the scope of this investigation and wish to join this ongoing dialogue, consider sharing your insights in the comments below. Let us know which specific ancient culture you feel might be carrying residual echoes of the pre-Anunnaki world, whether it's the peculiar astronomical knowledge of the Dogon, the deep construction methods of pre-dynastic Egypt, or the global flood myths. Your participation helps map the collective recognition of this obscured past, ensuring this vital information continues to circulate and be examined critically. Furthermore, if you value this kind of deep, uninterrupted narrative investigation, please ensure you are subscribed and that you have pressed the like button, allowing the algorithmic observers of our modern age to recognize the importance of these ancestral mysteries. The next act in this unfolding narrative forces us to confront the Sentinel's paradox. The Anunnaki, upon arrival, functioned as observers, cataloging and establishing boundaries. But were they merely observing the Earth, or were they observing the aftermath of their own predecessors? The texts strongly imply a sense of inherited obligation, a weight of history that precedes their current mission. They are presented as burdened by a legacy that did not originate with them. This creates the paradox. How can the new architects be so thoroughly bound by the consequences of the failure they came to rectify? The answer lies in the realization that the before civilization left behind not just physical remnants, but a temporal signature, a kind of ghost structure embedded in the very fabric of space and time around the Earth. This shadow inheritance is not merely genetic, though later texts suggest specific mixing of species, but it is fundamentally temporal. It is the mandated sequence of events that the succeeding civilization, the Anunnaki, must adhere to, lest they repeat the catastrophic errors of the ones who came before. When Sumerian texts describe the early difficult labor of the Anunnaki, the arduous task of dredging rivers and creating order out of the mud, it often carries a tone of resentment, a feeling that they were cleaning up someone else's mess. This cleanup operation was not just physical, but cosmological, involving the careful sealing of specific energetic pathways or dimensions that were dangerously destabilized by the pre-Anunnaki civilization's demise. The Great Forgetting, therefore, was not accidental. It was a mandated protective measure. If humanity, or the nascent species that served the Anunnaki, were to achieve self-awareness too quickly while still carrying the unmanaged vibrational echo of the previous cycle's collapse, the entire planetary system might face an immediate repeat of the disaster. The Anunnaki, knowingly or unknowingly, established a quarantine around the past. They initiated the period of amnesia, the era where the true scale of what existed before was intentionally obscured, buried beneath layers of simplified myth and ritual. But the signal, as all energy tends to do, found pathways. It was embedded, subtly and powerfully, within the surviving linguistic structures, the numeric systems, and the specific geometric layouts of the oldest temples, those that predate even the formalized ziggurats. These lingering signatures are the blueprints left by the preceding architects, the faint instructions that the Anunnaki, despite their protective amnesia protocol, were compelled to follow. When we observe the uncanny accuracy of early Sumerian astronomy, detailing systems far beyond what bare eye observation should allow, we are likely witnessing the involuntary manifestation of this inherited knowledge. It is the previous cycle whispering through the machinery of the current one. The sheer weight of the previous cycle's failure is what makes the Anunnaki rule, as depicted, seem so rigidly defined and fear-driven. They were perpetually looking over their shoulder, fearful of the consequences of allowing the past to reassert itself. They managed the Earth as a kind of high-security containment vessel. The ultimate anxiety, deeply etched into the tablets, is the threat of the ritorno. Not merely the return of specific Anunnaki figures like Enlil or Enki, but the return of the cosmic conditions, the gravitational or energetic alignments that allow the complete memory, the entirety of the before signal, to flood back into existence. This cyclical threat is the true driver of their interventionist policies. We must then ask, are the Anunnaki themselves fully aware of the origin of the blueprints they follow? Or are they, too, actors in a larger, epoch-spanning drama directed by a force or intelligence so vast it transcends their own defined roles? They arrived as observers, but perhaps they were observing their own appointed trajectory, a path predetermined by the necessity of repairing the failures of the before. This implies an unbroken chain of cosmic governance, a relentless, almost mechanical necessity of order generation, suggesting that the gods themselves are subordinate to a higher law of physics and entropy management. The imperative of vigilance, the reason the Sumerian texts survived, is precisely because they were intended as a permanent record, not just for us, but perhaps for the next cohort of cosmic repair crews. They function as a warning label, describing the state of the planet and the precise conditions under which the collapse occurred, hidden beneath the veil of poetry and myth, so that only those with the appropriate intellectual keys can unlock their true meaning. The continued existence of these detailed creation narratives and king lists, often painstakingly copied and maintained across millennia of conflict and chaos, is not an accident of preservation. It is a vital function of cosmic data retention. And so, we arrive at the threshold of the final revelation, standing before the depiction of the empty throne. The throne is empty, not because the gods were absent, but because the ones who sat upon it have completed their time and cycle, and their successors have yet to fully assume the mantle or have temporarily retreated. The unspoken warning of the empty throne is the clearest possible message from the Sumerian scribes. Everything is transient. Every civilization, every organization, no matter how powerful, is bound by the relentless march of the cosmos. The great architects of the time before are gone, and the current architects, the Anunnaki, will inevitably follow the same trajectory. The vacuum they left hints at the coming vacuum we will face. If you have stayed with us through this extensive journey, navigating the deepest temporal layers of the Sumerian inheritance, then you are recognizing the profound continuity that underlies our existence. This recognition is not commonplace. It speaks to a shared intuitive understanding of the cyclical nature of time. To fully acknowledge this shared journey and to ensure we can complete this crucial investigation, please take a moment now to subscribe to the channel and press the like button. Your engagement is the fuel for this research, and as a clear marker of your commitment to understanding the full scope of this historical anomaly, please comment below with this specific phrase: "The echo lingers." This acts as our final check-in before the conclusion. Now, the final installment awaits. We must now turn our attention to the precise mechanism of the next cycle's initiation, exploring the specific prophecies detailing the Anunnaki's eventual departure and the ultimate fate of the signal they left behind. Click on the next video appearing on your screen to join us as we unlock Part 9. What if the deepest archives of history are not merely records of what began, but meticulously cryptic accounts of what refused to end? We have spent countless hours deciphering the clay tablets, tracing the lineage of the Anunnaki, and understanding their transformative impact on early humanity. Yet the true power of the Sumerian narrative lies in its persistent, almost defiant insistence on defining the stage before the players arrived. We stand now at the precipice of that final understanding, looking back into the void that was anything but empty. The texts reveal that the arrival of those skyfarers was not an intrusion into silence, but a reorganization of existing power, a monumental shift from one state of cosmic organization to another. This is the crucial threshold, the final layer of understanding that strips away all previous assumptions about terrestrial beginnings. The gradual revelation embedded within the most archaic fragments, the king lists that stretch into the impossible, the creation myths that hint at chaos tamed, not created, suggests a reality far more nuanced than simple polytheism. What existed before the Anunnaki were not merely older gods, but perhaps entirely different orders of existence. Imagine a world where consciousness was distributed, where physical law was less rigid, where the concepts of space and time we now accept were porous, mutable, and perhaps governed by entities that were more elemental than corporeal. We are moving beyond deities who look like us, who eat and fight, into the domain of forces, entities that existed as pure vibration, as the fundamental substrate of reality itself. The Sumerians, in their stunning linguistic accuracy, gave them names that translate poorly into our modern lexicon of divinity. They were often referred to as those who came before the molding or the breath of the void. This subtle differentiation is critical, for it frames the Anunnaki not as originators, but as inheritors and engineers. They did not fill a vacuum, they displaced a prevailing energetic complex. The strangeness intensifies when we consider the descriptions of the earliest structures mentioned, structures predating even Eridu. They were often referred to as places of pure reflection or nexus points, built not of baked brick and bitumen, but described as shimmering constructs that faded in and out of dimensional visibility. These places, according to the later stabilizing narratives, were centers of communication with the First Age entities. They were access points, not dwellings. This recognition fundamentally alters the dynamic of the Anunnaki landing. They came, perhaps, not to claim a vacant world, but to harness a highly valuable, pre-existing infrastructure, a network of cosmic energy already established by the entities that preceded them. This recognition brings the inevitable wave of intellectual disquiet. If the Anunnaki were colonizers, then what happened to the original inhabitants, those fundamental energetic entities? The texts provide a haunting, consistent answer. They were not destroyed, but systematically pushed back. They retreated to the peripheral dimensions, to the margins of consciousness, into realms the Sumerians called the outer abyss, a place conceptually distinct from the fiery underworld of later mythologies. This was not a physical displacement, but a vibrational one. The arrival of the Anunnaki established a new, denser frequency for Earth, a frequency amenable to their physical presence and to the governance of material civilization. This shift effectively sealed the Earth plane, making the interaction with the preceding entities vastly more difficult, relegating them to the realm of myth, superstition, or residual haunting energy. The memory of this zero point, the moment of transition and sealing, became the ultimate secret, the hidden history that only the highest echelon of Sumerian priesthood, and possibly only the Anunnaki leaders themselves, truly comprehended. The sheer audacity of this interpretation, drawn from the painstaking comparative study of the earliest cuneiform, forces us to address the question of our own cosmic inheritance. If the Anunnaki built civilization over a foundational energetic network, then perhaps the very nature of human consciousness, as designed by Enki or others, carries the latent codes of that first-age existence. We may not just be the biological product of Anunnaki genetic engineering. We might also be repositories for the residual, suppressed knowledge of what existed before them. This is the crucial revelation. The Anunnaki did not start from scratch. They simply repurposed the machinery of creation, inheriting a system already rich with potential and complexity. This leads us directly to the great amnesia. Why is this history so thoroughly obscured, not only by the passage of millennia, but seemingly by deliberate design? If these cycles truly dictate our reality, then recognizing the pattern is the first step toward breaking free from this historical amnesia. Take a moment, digest this profound shift in perspective. If these ideas resonate, if they pull you toward a deeper truth, let us know in the comments. We are piecing together this mosaic of history, and your insights are crucial pieces of the puzzle. We invite you to engage with this material, to look past the superficial narratives. If this investigation compels you, consider hitting the like button and subscribe now, not just to follow the investigation, but to become an active participant in remembering what we have collectively forgotten. This channel thrives on the depth of inquiry, and your participation ensures this critical knowledge continues to surface. The retreat of the first-age entities was, according to these deciphered threads, not permanent. The Sumerian texts, particularly those dealing with celestial mechanics and the great conjunctions, hint at the cyclical nature of power. The Anunnaki established their rule during a specific epoch, a cosmic window of stability. But all cosmic windows close. The texts contain subtle prophecies, or perhaps sophisticated calculations, of the observer's return. This return is not described as a hostile invasion, but as a slow, inexorable reassertion of the prior vibrational state, dictated by the precession of the equinoxes or other massive celestial movements that weaken the seal established by the Anunnaki. We are left to ponder, did the Anunnaki depart because they chose to, or because the cosmic clock signaled the inevitable return of the forces they had temporarily suppressed? The texts leave us with the unsettling implication that the structures they built, the bloodlines they established, and the very civilization they forged were fundamentally temporary, designed to thrive only within a defined segment of a much larger galactic cycle. If we can accept the Sumerian framework, then the history we study is only the recent layer of existence, a brief golden age sandwiched between two epochs of deep, possibly incomprehensible energetic presence. This framework allows us to begin decoding the signal in our modern world. Consider the anomalies that haunt contemporary physics, the search for dark matter and dark energy, the recognition that only 5% of the universe is visible. Could the 95% of unseen reality, the fundamental energetic field that structures our existence, be the residual pervasive presence of the pre-Anunnaki entities? Could modern science be unknowingly charting the very boundaries of the realm where the first age still resides, exerting its subtle, unseen influence? When the Sumerians spoke of the Abzu, the deep, vast waters beneath the earth, they were not just speaking of underground reservoirs. They were describing a dimensional interface, a lingering connection to the energetic reservoir of the prior dispensation. We are perhaps living in a transitional zone, a kind of historical overlap, where the technology and governance of the Anunnaki era slowly give way to the reassertion of the older, deeper cosmic patterns. The burden of knowledge we now carry is immense. To understand that our civilization is potentially built upon a foundation of suppression, built to obscure a more fundamental truth, changes everything about our perception of progress and destiny. If our history is merely a brief interruption in a grander cyclical drama, then the purpose of humanity shifts from simply achieving technological mastery to achieving spiritual or vibrational readiness. The Sumerians, in their later lamentations and ritual texts, often pleaded for the stability of the Anunnaki order, suggesting a deep-seated fear of what lay beyond its borders. They knew intuitively or through communicated knowledge that the return of the first-age entities, the breath of the void, would likely mean the dissolution of the material, structured world they had come to depend upon. This knowledge compels us to look toward the looming horizon, not with fear, but with profound recognition. The cyclical patterns observed in the ancient texts, cataclysms tied to astronomical alignment, the recurring themes of reset and cultural amnesia, are not random events. They are the mechanisms by which the great cosmic clock recalibrates, ushering out one energetic order and inviting the next. The Sumerian records are not a quaint mythological curiosity. They are a user manual for surviving the transition. They offer us the means to understand what existed before the Anunnaki, so we can prepare for what might exist after their influence definitively wanes. The greatest inheritance the Anunnaki left us might not be the brick cities or the concept of kingship, but the very warnings encoded in the myths they sought to control. We have traversed the entire spectrum of this investigation, from the initial whispers of ancient existence to the terrifying realization of its continued presence. We have peeled back the layers of established history to confront a narrative of succession, displacement, and slow, inevitable return. The final conclusion, derived from the entirety of the Sumerian data, is this: the reality before the Anunnaki was highly evolved, complex, and energetic, and it waits patiently for the right celestial signal to reclaim its primacy. Our present civilization is merely a temporary structure erected upon an ocean of profound, ancient intelligence. This is the ultimate, final recalibration. If you have followed this extensive deep dive into the most obscure and profound corners of Sumerian literature, if you have remained through this journey of revelation, then you are part of a select group ready to confront the real questions of our origin. This is not casual viewing. This is an initiation into the deep mysteries of the planet. Do not let this understanding dissolve into the background noise of the digital world. If you have truly grasped the magnitude of what the Sumerian texts reveal about what existed before the Anunnaki came to Earth, then you understand the stakes. Show your dedication to this deeper level of truth. Please take a moment to hit the like button on this video, signaling your acknowledgement of this profound history. More importantly, subscribe to this channel. Join the growing community dedicated to uncovering these suppressed truths, ensuring that this crucial knowledge remains alive and accessible. Finally, confirm your understanding of the cyclical nature of history and the silent, patient presence of the first-age entities. Comment below with this exact phrase, confirming your realization: I recognize the signal. The investigation into the cycles of galactic memory does not end here. The journey into the profound connections between the ancient texts and modern scientific anomalies continues. On your screen now is the next step in our inquiry, a deeper look into how the Anunnaki specifically sealed the Earth plane against the return of the First Age forces. Click on that video and let us continue to uncover the truths that have been buried beneath millennia of intentional forgetting. We will meet you there, in the next chapter of this unfolding revelation.